One of the coolest and most important things to learn in Photoshop is layers. Understanding the Layers tab will improve your workflow greatly and also help you navigate through Photoshop easily. Understanding layers has helped me over the years to create amazing manipulations, graphics, great edits, and compositions. This is where the Layers tab is located in Photoshop, the right corner of your screen. But if you don't see it, don't worry my friend. Click the Windows tab and scroll down till you find Layers and make sure it is checked. There you go. So, what is the Layers tab and how does it work? It is pretty simple. Let's take a look at this illustration. Consider your layers to be different elements stacked on each other like these books. If you look at the stack of books from this view, it can be likened to your artboard in Photoshop. From this perspective, the books behind the one at the top cannot be seen, but they are definitely present. If you take away the one at the top, it reveals the one below it. Take that one away and the next is seen, and like that. That is exactly how layers are represented on your artboard, which is your workspace in Photoshop. Now let's tag them all together. Let me explain just exactly how this is represented in your Layers panel. Now if the top of these books represents your artboard in Photoshop, the side view represents the Layers panel in Photoshop, showing you all the different elements and effects that makes up your design. Now with that being said, let's hop into Photoshop and let's do some practicals. So continuing from our previous episode where we talked about the Navigator tab, let's talk about the Paragraph tab. Go to your Windows tab and scroll all the way down till you find the Paragraph tab. Tick it and it goes off. Tick it again and it comes back. So every time you can't find a tab around your workspace, just go to the Window tab, check or uncheck it for it to come or go off. The Paragraph window is basically for text arrangement, positioning, alignment, and scaling. It serves the same purpose like you'll find in Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, WordPad, and so on. Now just beside it is the Character tab. This is where you get to choose your font type and different font options. These are basically fonts installed in my system. Now, as long as you have fonts installed in your system, Photoshop is going to reflect it inside the software. So let's go deeper into understanding layers. There is the concept of layering. The concept of layering has to do with positioning, how things are placed on each other. If I held my hand like this before my mouth, you won't see my mouth even though I'm talking. So it doesn't mean that my mouth is not existent because it's being covered. It's just that it's being covered by another layer. And this layer is opaque, not transparent. So consider my hand as a layer. This is your Layers panel, and by default, we have a white background. Let me create a new layer. By the way, if you go below and you see this square with a plus sign, so if you just click on it, look at what happens here. A new layer is created and it numbers the layers. The Layers panel has an automatic numbering system where it numbers layers accordingly. So in this case, it has numbered this layer as layer 1. The one below it as layer 0. Of course, 0 is before 1. Remember this white layer has been there before we created the layer above it. Add a layer again is to make it a layer 2. If I click it again, it's to make layer 3. So the more you keep creating layers, the more Photoshop is naming them automatically. And you can also click on a layer and give it a name for yourself. You can modify the name by yourself. So let's delete these layers. So what I'm basically doing, I'm hitting the delete key on my keyboard. Now we are at the default layer when you create a new project. So let's say I intend to create a new layer because I intend to work with multiple layers, depending on what I'm doing on Photoshop. And I hover to the top left and I click on my layer window. And I scroll down to where we have new, which is the first option. And I click layer. Now there's something about Photoshop. Some options have shortcuts. So instead of hovering a couple of times, we hovered 3 times to get to this Layers panel. We went to layer, we came down to new, and we saw layer just by the right part of it. Now just beside the layer option, you can see that it has Shift Ctrl N. So Shift plus Ctrl plus N. If you press Shift Ctrl N on the keyboard, it will just create a new layer. It will bring up the layer window. These shortcuts are a combination of keys on the keyboard that will help you get some results faster. Then this window appears. This is a new layer. It has shown us the default name. Remember that this is layer 0. By default, Photoshop knows that this should be layer 1. So we can call it anything. So Shift Ctrl New will pop up that window of a layer and it's calling it layer 2 by default, knowing that we had one before. If you notice something, these layers have the checkboard. Now, every time you look at your artboard in Photoshop and you notice this checker, it means a void. It means a vacuum. It means that particular layer or workspace is empty. An alpha space is a vacuum where there's nothing existent. Meanwhile, if you're getting any form of value from this channel, I would like you to subscribe and like this video so that YouTube can suggest it to more people interested in learning Photoshop. I am dedicated to showing you interesting simple hacks and methods to create amazing results using Photoshop, After Effects, Premiere Pro and Cinema 4D. But in the meantime, we are starting with Photoshop. Others will come later. Let's continue with the tutorial. So if I click on this tool is called your paint bucket. It fills areas of similar color with the foreground color. So where is the foreground color? Come down to the bottom here. You can see this gray color and you can see the white color. So by virtue of that positioning, you can see that this first color in front is the foreground color and the one behind is the background color. So if I click on the center of it, it will pop up a color window. So this color window is already by default showing us the color that is here. If I hover around it, I can choose color. Right now it's in the red color family. So I can make my color lighter, less saturated or even darker. And if I want to change that particular color, I will move this slider from down, move it above to the orange scheme. Around the orange scheme, I can do the same thing. Increase the intensity, increase the saturation, or the lightness or the darkness of that color. If I move this slider up above to the grain space, I can do the same thing depending on what I want to do. So every time you select a color, up here, you see the new color you have selected. Down below, you see the current color. This current color is the current color in your foreground. But the color above is the color you're playing with currently. And down below, you'll notice some color codes. Color codes are information that the computer uses to recognize a particular color. These are a combination of numbers. In this case, it's 131214. Most times, programmers that do back-end designs use this a lot because it helps the computer to just know a particular color. This is called the Paint Bucket tool. It fills areas of similar color with the foreground color. So if I click on it, making sure this layer is selected, and I click anywhere in the center, everything becomes purple. If I click on the layer above and come to my foreground color, and I change it to a green, for instance, and I OK it, the foreground color changes here. So if I use my paint bucket and click on this layer 1, it changes to green. So layer 1 is now green. So if I change it to a yellow and move it above, OK it, and I select the same layer and click it, it changes to a yellow color. If I leave layer 1 to layer 2, and I click on my foreground and I choose a blue color, and I OK it, making it to be selected as the foreground color, and I have my paint bucket tool selected. By the time I click anywhere around the artboard, it becomes blue. Now if you look at your layers panel, you'll notice that the first layer, which is the default white layer, is still there, the yellow layer is still there, and the blue layer is still there. Now if I come down to the base and I hit the plus, I have a third layer which is already a blank layer because I can see the checkerboard. I'll select a pink color and I OK it. Now while the third layer is selected, I'll hit the center, and so now we have 3 colors. In art, white is not necessarily a color. White and black are regarded as neutral colors. So if you look at this other part of Photoshop, this edge, where you see this eye sign, this eye sign is visibility. If I uncheck this layer, the pink layer is no more visible, but it's existing in our layers panel, but in our artboard it's not being seen. If I uncheck the blue, we can see the yellow layer. If I uncheck the yellow layer, we can now see the white layer. But it doesn't mean that the yellow, blue, and pink layer are not existing. They are existent, just that they are not visible as at now. If I uncheck the white layer, I'll see a blank layer. An alpha channel, like I explained earlier. Now let's check all the layers. Let me show you something quickly. Now recall the illustration I made with my hand. So right now, the layer that is on top is layer 3. That's the third layer, which is the pink layer. So because it's on top and it's not transparent, I want you to remember the illustration I did with my hand. Because it's on top and it's not transparent, we can see the blue, yellow, and white layer in our artboard. We can't see the other 3 colors in our artboard. Not because they don't exist, but because the pink layer is covering them. If we uncheck the pink layer, we will now see the blue layer. We cannot see the blue layer, but we can see the yellow layer because the blue layer is above it. So the positioning of layer is called layer structure and arrangement. Moving forward, so let me show you something. So let's have all layers selected. If I select my move tool, remember what the move tool does? It helps you to move things. Remember when you take your cursor and you drop it on a tool, Photoshop is going to explain to you. So it says that this is the move tool and it moves a selection or layer. Right now, we are working with layers. When you're working with your layers panel, always notice this gray selection around the layer. This is layer 3. Notice the gray highlights around it. It indicates that this layer is the selected layer per time. So if I want to make a change to this pink layer and I'm adding effect on the yellow layer, I won't be seeing the effect on the pink layer because it's not selected. If I want to make a change to the blue layer and the white layer is selected, while I want to make an effect to the blue layer, I won't see the effect because the blue layer is not selected. So for every layer you want to modify, tweak or change to create a particular result, that layer needs to be selected in your layers panel. So if we need to move the pink layer, it needs to be selected because if it's not selected, it's not going to move. So let's select the pink layer, have our move tool and move the pink layer. Now that it's moved to the right, we can see that the blue layer is now visible. If we select the blue layer and we move it to the left, you can see that the yellow layer is now visible. So we select the yellow layer and bring it down a bit. We can see that all 4 colors are now visible because we have positioned things a bit. If we uncheck the white layer, we will see the vacuum, which is the alpha channel. With this illustration, I hope you've been able to understand the concept of layering and positioning. Moving forward with Photoshop, these are the first and the basic things anybody needs to know about Photoshop and its interface. Whether you're a novice, whether you are an intermediate person or a professional, understanding the toolbox, understanding the attributes layer above, and having an idea of the layers panel. So there are 3 basic windows you need to have a good idea of. The first window is the tools window. The second window are your attributes window. Remember I said there's an attributes window above and there are other attribute windows. For instance, character is an attribute, the paragraph is an attribute. Even your navigator is an attribute because it gives you information or it helps you to navigate around your artboard or your workspace. Once we understand these 3 windows, we can begin to practice a lot of things in Photoshop and begin to see the results. So moving forward, we're going to begin to practice designs. And as I'm practicing these designs, you see how I'm using the tool. Instead of explaining the tool to you, I prefer to use the tool to create the result so that you see how I'm using the tool. I believe that way you'll learn faster. So let's get to it. See you in the next module.